The sterile hum of the air filtration system was a constant, low thrum against my eardrums, a comforting rhythm in the crime lab evidence processing clean room. I preferred the quiet methodical order of this space, the precise measurements, the careful isolation of evidence. Here, the chaos of the field gave way to controlled scrutiny. My gloved hands moved with practiced economy over a set of bone fragments laid out on a sterile cloth, vestiges of a cold case I'd been chipping away at for months. Each fractured piece told a story, a whisper from the past, if you knew how to listen. I glanced at the caller ID, Detective Harding. I peeled off my gloves, dropping them into the biohazard bin, and picked up the phone. "Seth here," I answered, my voice steady. "Got a situation for you, Seth." Harding's voice was gravelly, edged with a weariness I knew well. "Blackwood Manor. Dr. the Professor Finch. Dead." My fingers tightened around the phone. Blackwood Manor. The name alone conjured images of sprawling grounds, ancient oaks, and centuries of secrets. It was a landmark, a historical treasure trove, and the ancestral home of the Finch family, a lineage almost as old as the manor itself. The Professor Finch was a celebrated historian, an authority on obscure European medieval periods, and a man I'd admired for his academic rigor. His death was more than a local tragedy, it was a loss to the entire historical community. "What happened?" I asked, already anticipating the worst. "Appears to be a fall," Harding stated, his tone flat. "From the grand staircase. Nasty tumble. Estate manager found him this morning. Emergency services already cleared the scene, initial reports are clear, accidental." Accidental. The word sat heavy in the air. I knew Harding. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he also didn't call me for open and shut cases. "And you want my expertise?" "The local division is satisfied. But it's Finch, Seth, and it's Blackwood. Something about it feels off. Too neat. Too quick. I need a second set of eyes, your kind of eyes. Someone who can read more than just impact wounds." He didn't need to elaborate. My specialty wasn't just bones, it was context, the minute details that painted a broader picture, often one that transcended the immediate present. I understood the subtle language of time, the way history left its indelible marks. "Send me the coordinates," I said, already reaching for my field kit. "I'm on my way." The drive to Blackwood Manor was a journey into a different era. The paved roads gave way to winding country lanes, bordered by ancient stone walls draped in ivy. The trees grew denser, their gnarled branches reaching across the narrow path like skeletal fingers. The sky, a bruised purple, pressed down, promising rain. A patrol car blocked the main drive, its emergency lights a stark modern contrast to the antiquity of the estate. Harding stood near the entrance, a formidable figure even in the twilight, speaking quietly with a uniformed officer. He spotted my vehicle and nodded, waving me through. "Thanks for coming, Seth," he greeted me, his breath misting in the cool air. "It's quite a scene." "Tell me about it," I replied, grabbing my gear from the back of my SUV. The air here felt heavy, thick with unspoken stories. Victims still inside, where he was found. We've got the scene secured, minimal disturbance. The estate manager is shaken up, but cooperative. Says he found Finch at the bottom of the main staircase this morning, around 7. Finch apparently worked late in his study, a habit of his. Had a few drinks, maybe missed a step. Harding gestured towards the massive oak doors. "Follow me." Inside, the manor was a cavernous space, dimly lit despite the grand chandeliers hanging overhead. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of old wood, dust, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. My gaze immediately fixed on the sprawling, spiral staircase that dominated the central hall. A crime scene technician, busy documenting the area, looked up and nodded curtly. The medical examiner's assistant was just finishing their preliminary assessment of the deceased. The Professor Finch lay sprawled at the foot of the staircase, a tableau of tragic finality. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm flung out, the other tucked beneath him. His face, usually animated and sharp, was now a mask of stillness, bruised and pale. A deep laceration marked his forehead, and his hair was matted with dried fluid. I knelt beside the body, my gaze sweeping over the scene, absorbing every detail. The broken banister section near the halfway point of the staircase. The scattered papers, historical documents by the look of them, some stained, others pristine, lying near Finch's outstretched hand. The way his expensive tweed jacket was rumpled, his spectacles askew on the rug a few feet away. "Looks like he went headfirst," the medical examiner's assistant commented, stepping back to give me room. "Severe head trauma, likely a broken neck. Consistent with a fall from this height." I didn't respond, my focus elsewhere. My eyes traced the contours of Finch's hand, noting the way his fingers were curled. Then, I saw it. Beneath his fingernails, barely visible, was a faint residue. It wasn't the typical dust or carpet fiber I might expect from a fall. This was a fine, reddish-brown particulate, almost like a powdered pigment. And more than that, on the back of his left hand, near the wrist, was a faint, linear abrasion. It wasn't deep, but it was distinct, as if he'd brushed against something rough, something textured. My gaze drifted from the abrasion to the scattered papers near his hand. They were old, parchment yellowed with age, filled with elegant, unfamiliar script. One piece, partially obscured beneath his arm, showed a faint outline, a symbol I couldn't immediately place, but it had a distinctly archaic feel, reminiscent of very early Bronze Age carvings. I leaned closer, my nose inches from the particulate beneath his nails. A subtle, earthy scent, unlike anything from the manor's old wood or dust, reached me. It was primal, ancient. This wasn't just a fall. Something far older than Blackwood Manor, far more deliberate than a simple misstep. Harding was right. Something was profoundly off. The easy answer wasn't the true one. The transfer of Dr. Finch's remains to the main forensic facility had been swift, handled with the practiced efficiency of the scene investigators. I'd ridden in silence, the lingering image of that reddish-brown residue beneath his fingernails still sharp in my mind. It was a detail too small, too specific, to be dismissed as an artifact of a simple tumble down the grand staircase. My gut, a well-calibrated instrument honed by decades of sifting through the detritus of tragedy and malice, told me something was deeply wrong. The air hummed with the soft thrum of filtration systems, a constant whisper that underscored the meticulous control of the environment. I was gowned, gloved, masked, and capped, a ghost in my own specialized uniform, surrounded by an array of instruments that felt like extensions of my own senses. The remains of Dr. Finch lay on a stainless steel examination table, draped in a pristine sheet, awaiting my invasive scrutiny. "Ready when you are, Seth," the lead evidence technician, a methodical individual with sharp eyes, announced from behind a console of monitors. His voice was muffled by his own mask, but his intent was clear. He would log every action, every observation. "Begin the macroscopic examination," I instructed, my own voice a low murmur. I pulled back the sheet, revealing the quiet form of the historian. The initial assessment at the manor had been necessarily brief, constrained by the environment. Here, I had the luxury of time and precision. I methodically worked my way over the body, my gloved fingertips tracing the contours of the skin, feeling for subtle shifts in tissue, areas of discoloration, or concealed trauma. The primary injuries, consistent with a fall, were evident: contusions. Abrasions, a deep laceration on the temple where his head had reportedly struck the newel post. But I was looking for what wasn't immediately obvious. My attention lingered on the left forearm. There was a faint bruising pattern, almost imperceptible, along the ulna. It wasn't a direct impact injury from the fall itself, not in the way the other contusions presented. This felt different. I made a note, then moved to the skeletal structure. The true story, I knew, was often written in bone. With a series of careful movements, the remains were repositioned under the high-resolution imaging equipment. I spent the next hour reviewing radiographic scans, scrutinizing every pixel. The reported fall trajectory, as described by the manor staff, suggested a forward momentum, a tumble down the wide steps. The injury should reflect that: compressive forces, perhaps some shearing. But then I saw it, on the proximal phalanx of the left index finger. Not a clean break, but a constellation of microscopic bone fractures, a fine network of spiderweb cracks radiating from a minute point of impact. I zoomed in further, the image filling the primary monitor. These weren't from the primary impact of the fall, they were too localized, too precise. They spoke of a twisting or grinding force, a lateral stress rather than a simple compression. More significantly, the location on the finger was peculiar. It wasn't consistent with bracing for a fall, which typically manifests in wrist or elbow fractures, or even a splayed hand impact. This was as if the finger itself had been caught, or twisted, with significant force. Note the microfractures on the left index finger, proximal phalanx, I dictated, my gaze fixed on the screen. Consistent with a rotational or shearing force, distinct from the primary fall trauma. The lead technician's fingers flew across his keyboard, logging the observation. His silence was a testament to the gravity of the finding. My suspicions solidified into a hard knot in my stomach. A simple fall wouldn't cause that. Someone had grabbed him. Or twisted his hand. I moved on, turning my focus to the clothing Dr. Finch had worn. The tweed jacket, now carefully laid out on a sterile sheet, bore the expected scuffs and tears from the purported accident. But experience had taught me that the smallest particles could tell the biggest stories. I took a fresh set of adhesive tape lifts, carefully pressing them onto various sections of the fabric, particularly along the cuffs and lapels, areas prone to collecting contact evidence. Then, using fine forceps, I began to pluck individual fibers and particulate matter, transferring them to labeled slides. Hours later, hunched over a powerful stereo microscope, the world outside the lens ceased to exist. I scanned slide after slide, sifting through common textile fibers, dust mites, and environmental debris. The air in the manor, though old, wasn't unique enough to yield anything significant on its own. I was looking for an anomaly, something that screamed out of place. And then, I found it. Their color was a deep, almost purplish black, unlike any common soil or dust I knew. I carefully isolated one fragment and switched to higher magnification, then to polarized light. The crystal structure became clear, an intricate, layered lattice, exhibiting strong pleochroism, a change in color depending on the angle of light. This was no ordinary mineral. I cross-referenced the optical properties with geological databases, running through a mental Rolodex of rare earth elements, volcanic deposits, and ancient rock formations. The results, when they finally populated on a secondary screen, were startling. The mineral dust matched the spectroscopic profile of a specific type of manganite ore, a form typically found in deep vein deposits associated with ancient, tectonically stable regions. More importantly, the particular trace elements within this sample pointed to a geological signature not present anywhere near the estate, nor indeed, anywhere in this country. This wasn't soil from the garden, or dust from the attic. This was exotic. My breath hitched, a faint rasp against the inside of my mask. A microscopic bone fracture indicative of struggle, and now, a unique mineral dust on his clothing, alien to his environment, pointing to a source far removed from the manor. Dr. Finch hadn't simply fallen. He had been in contact with something, or someone, carrying this material. Someone had been with him, perhaps struggled with him, and then, judging by the scene, made it look like an accident. The meticulous facade of the historical estate, the quiet dignity of a scholar's demise, it was all a carefully constructed lie. And I had just peeled back the first layer. This wasn't just foul play, this was deliberate, and it was tied to something much larger. Turning my attention to the victim's right hand. The lead technician had already documented the fracture patterns on the left wrist, a clear sign of defensive struggle. It was almost imperceptible, a fine grit nestled in the cuticle, easily missed by a less scrupulous eye. "Found something, Seth?" the lead technician asked, his voice low, not breaking the sterile silence. He adjusted his own microscope, examining a different sample. "Possibly," I replied, my gaze fixed on the screen displaying the magnified image. The residue wasn't soil in the conventional sense. It had a crystalline structure, reflecting the light with a subtle, almost metallic glint. This isn't garden variety dirt. It's distinct. I leaned closer, adjusting the focus. "Run an elemental analysis. I want to know everything about this." The technician nodded, already moving with practiced efficiency. He carefully extracted a minute sample, placing it on a slide for the spectrometer. The machine hummed, its internal mechanisms whirring as it began its work. The wait, though brief, felt like an eternity. My mind raced, trying to place the color, the texture. It reminded me of something, a faint echo from my extensive travels, but the specific memory remained elusive. After several tense minutes, the technician cleared his throat. "Preliminary results are in. High concentrations of iron oxides, silicate minerals. And something else. A significant presence of cinnabar. And trace amounts of native silver." My breath hitched. Cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral, wasn't common. Native silver, even less so. But together, in those quantities, it painted a very specific geological picture. "Cinnabar and native silver," I murmured, the words tasting like dust on my tongue. That's a very particular combination. It points to a specific type of ore deposit. Volcanic activity, hydrothermal vents, often found in ancient mining regions. The technician looked up, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. You're thinking. Not just any ground. Specific ground. Exactly, I confirmed, a sudden clarity washing over me. I encountered something similar once, a remote site in the Balkan Peninsula, an ancient Roman mining operation. Finch's research, his obsession with forgotten history. He wasn't just reading about it. The knot in my stomach tightened, but this time, it was laced with a determined resolve. This isn't from the estate grounds. This is from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere remote, somewhere significant. I pulled out my secure tablet, my fingers flying across the screen. I cross-referenced geological maps with known archaeological sites, filtering for cinnabar and native silver deposits. One location stood out, a remote valley nestled deep in the mountains, known for minor, unexploited mineral veins and rumored ancient settlements. It was far from any official archaeological grid, an area largely undisturbed. Finch had published a single, obscure paper years ago on the potential for Roman-era mining in that very region, a paper largely dismissed by mainstream academics. That's it, I declared, pointing to the highlighted coordinates. This is where he was. Or where he'd been recently. Finch wasn't merely a historian, he was an archaeologist at heart, and a stubborn one. This was an unsanctioned dig, I was certain. A place he'd kept hidden. The drive was long, winding through forgotten back roads that eventually dissolved into a rutted track. My vehicle, built for such terrain, bounced and jostled, the landscape growing progressively wilder. The air grew thinner, cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. After nearly 2 hours, the track ended abruptly at a small, makeshift clearing. A single, battered utility vehicle was parked haphazardly, its tires caked with the same reddish-brown mud I'd seen on Finch's shoes. The site itself was a shallow excavation, partially covered by tarpaulins, nestled into the side of a steep, tree-lined incline. Shovels and picks lay scattered, alongside buckets and sieves. It looked like a dig that had been abandoned in a hurry, or perhaps just for the day. A small, weather-beaten tent was pitched nearby, and a plume of smoke curled lazily from a crude fire pit. As I approached, a figure emerged from the tent. It was a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She clutched a mug, her eyes wide with surprise, then suspicion, as she saw me. This had to be the estranged research assistant, the one Finch had supposedly alienated with his increasingly secretive work. "You're Seth, aren't you?" he asked, his voice tight, a tremor in his hands. She recognized me from my public profile, no doubt. "I am," I confirmed, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm investigating Dr. Finch's death. I believe you were working with him recently, here." She hesitated, glancing nervously around the clearing, as if expecting someone else to appear. I was. Not anymore. He changed. Her grip tightened on the mug. He got obsessed. Obsessed with what? I pressed gently, my gaze sweeping over the excavation. I saw fragments of pottery, some worked stone. Nothing obviously out of place, but the context was everything. She gnawed on her lip, her eyes darting to the half-covered dig. a lost artifact. He called it the Heart of Ethelred. Some relic from the Anglo-Saxon period, supposedly lost for centuries. He believed it was buried here, in a forgotten Roman-era mine shaft, repurposed by later settlers. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. He said it wasn't just an artifact, that it held knowledge, power. And you believed him? I asked, maintaining a calm, steady demeanor. She shook her head emphatically. At first, I thought it was just academic zeal. But then he started meeting people. Strange people. Not academics. Always late at night, in remote places. He never told me who they were, just that they were investors. They had deep pockets, and even deeper secrets. She shivered despite the warmth of the fire. He grew paranoid. Said he was close to a discovery that would rewrite history, but that others wanted to keep it buried. He became reckless. What kind of people? I probed, taking a step closer. The air here was heavy with unspoken anxieties. Did you ever hear names? See faces clearly? She wrung her hands. No. Always cloaked. They spoke in hushed tones. But I heard snippets. Talk of the legacy, the bloodline. He'd come back from those meetings agitated, sometimes exhilarated, sometimes terrified. He was convinced this Heart of Ethelred was the key to something immense, something they were desperate to control. Her eyes, wide and fearful, met mine. He wasn't just looking for an artifact, Seth. He was uncovering a truth that someone, or some group, desperately wanted to keep hidden. And I think they killed him for it. The housekeeper's hushed confession about the legacy and the Heart of Ethelred echoed in my mind as I drove the winding estate road, the gravel crunching under my tires. Her fear had been palpable, a stark contrast to the official narrative of a simple, tragic fall. I had to see the dig site, the place she claimed the historian spent his last frantic days. The estate sprawled, a patchwork of manicured lawns giving way to overgrown woodland before opening into a cleared area. This was it. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The site itself was a mess, not the neat, grid excavation I'd expect from a professional historian. Instead, it looked like a frantic scramble. Freshly disturbed soil was mounded haphazardly, contrasting sharply with older, settled earth. I noted the crude tool marks, deeper and less precise than those of an archaeological spade. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't been careful. I knelt, running my gloved fingers over a patch of freshly turned earth near a half-collapsed trench. It wasn't just recent, it felt urgent, almost desperate. My gaze swept across the churned ground, searching for anything out of place. Amidst the clods of soil and scattered roots, a tiny glimmer caught my eye. I carefully brushed away the dirt, revealing a shard no larger than my thumbnail. It was pottery, undeniably ancient, but its glaze, a deep, almost iridescent black, and its finely incised geometric pattern, struck me as utterly foreign to this region. This wasn't local Anglo-Saxon ware. It felt older, more refined, distinctly Mediterranean or even Near Eastern. Anachronistic was an understatement. This fragment shouldn't be here, certainly not in a layer of soil that suggested a recent disturbance, not a carefully documented find. My internal clock ticked faster. The historian was obsessed with something called the Heart of Ethelred, a name that conjured images of ancient power and hidden relics. This shard, misplaced and out of time, felt like a breadcrumb. It confirmed my suspicion that the historian's death was tied to something far grander, and far more dangerous, than a simple slip. As I documented the fragment in the site's disarray, a patrol vehicle rumbled down the track, kicking up dust. The local police sergeant, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stepped out. He approached with an air of practiced authority that couldn't quite mask his irritation. "Still out here, Seth?" the sergeant asked, his voice gravelly. "Thought you'd be done with your investigation by now. We're ready to close this one up. Tragic accident, clear cut." I straightened, holding up my evidence bag containing the pottery shard. "It's not as clear-cut as you think, Sergeant. The victim had injuries inconsistent with a simple fall, and now I found evidence of recent, unauthorized digging here. And this." I held up the bag. "This pottery shard isn't from around here, or even this era. It suggests a much deeper, illicit activity." The sergeant squinted at the bag, then waved a dismissive hand. "Pottery? Come on, Seth. This estate has centuries of history. Could be anything. A souvenir, an old trinket. As for digging, maybe he was doing some late-night gardening." The man was eccentric. His gaze hardened. "Look, I've got orders from higher up. They want this wrapped. The family wants closure. The local authorities want to avoid any unnecessary complications." The unspoken threat hung in the air. "Don't rock the boat." I knew what unnecessary complications meant: political pressure, potential embarrassment, a scandal no one wanted to touch. "My findings are not unnecessary complications, Sergeant," I retorted, my voice firm. "They are facts. And these facts point away from an accident." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "All right, Seth. You do your thing. But don't expect us to hold up the paperwork indefinitely. We'll be releasing the body to the family for arrangements by end of week. The official cause of death will reflect our initial assessment unless you give us something concrete. Something a judge would look at and say, yep, murder." He turned, his message clear, and climbed back into his vehicle, leaving me alone with the disturbed earth and the weight of his words. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges as I drove back to my lab. The sergeant's resistance wasn't unexpected, but the urgency in his voice, the thinly veiled threat, was new. Someone was pushing hard to bury this. And that only solidified my resolve. Back at my facility, the sterile hum of the air filtration system greeted me. I navigated the familiar corridors to the crime lab evidence processing clean room. The room was a sanctuary of order, every tool precisely placed, every surface gleaming. I changed into my clean suit, gloved and masked, before entering. My eyes swept over the work surfaces, my analytical brain already preparing for the meticulous examination of the pottery shard. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a shattered window or a forced lock. It was far more subtle, a detail only I, with my obsessive attention to order, would notice. The small, weighted paperweight I used to secure my notes, a polished riverstone, was shifted a millimeter to the left of its usual spot. And the fine layer of dust I'd intentionally left on the edge of my primary workbench, a silent sentinel against intrusion, was disturbed, a faint, almost invisible swipe mark marring its surface. Someone had been here. They hadn't taken anything, the expensive microscopes, the digital imaging equipment, the locked evidence freezer, all appeared untouched. No, this wasn't a robbery. This was a message. A cold certainty settled in my gut. They knew I was onto something. The anachronistic pottery, the strange injuries, the housekeeper's terrified whispers, it was all connected. And someone wanted me to stop looking. I was closer than I thought. I had until the end of the week. That wasn't much time, but it was enough to prove my hunch wasn't just academic curiosity. I peeled off my jacket, donned a fresh lab coat, gloves, and a hairnet, then pushed through the double doors. The room was a stark white box, illuminated by harsh, shadowless LED panels. A stainless steel workbench dominated the center, already prepped with a microabrasion unit, a polarized light microscope, and an array of specialized tools. The fragment, carefully nestled in a padded evidence box, awaited me. I retrieved it, placing it gently on a velvet-lined tray under the microscope. Under magnification, the fragment's surface revealed a mesmerizing tapestry of minute details. The glaze, a deep, earthy red, possessed an almost organic sheen. I studied the hairline cracks, the subtle crazing that spoke of centuries of environmental exposure. Conventional wisdom, and indeed, my initial assessment, pointed to an authentic piece from the late Bronze Age, specifically a type found in a lesser-known Aegean culture Finch had been meticulously studying. The detective had dismissed it as a mere decorative shard, but I knew better. Finch hadn't just collected trinkets, he'd pursued knowledge with a scholar's zeal. I spent hours, hunched over the microscope, my eye aching but my mind buzzing. I ran a tiny, soft brush over the surface, dislodging a microscopic speck of what appeared to be organic residue. I carefully collected it, placing it on a separate slide for later analysis, but my focus remained on the fragment itself. The crystalline structure of the clay, the mineral inclusions, the very way the pigment had bonded to the surface, it all screamed authenticity. Then I saw it. A minuscule anomaly, almost imperceptible even at 400x magnification. A barely there hairline fissure, not a natural crack from age, but a stress fracture that didn't quite align with the surrounding material. It was like a faint scar on otherwise perfect skin. I adjusted the lighting, shifting from direct to oblique illumination, and the anomaly sharpened into focus. My breath hitched. I repositioned the fragment, rotating it slowly. The seam wasn't a natural fault line in the pottery. It was a join. Two pieces of clay, fired at different times, or perhaps even different compositions, had been fused together with an astonishing level of skill. The glaze, so expertly applied, had masked the join almost perfectly. This wasn't an ancient artifact. It was a composite. And the implications of that realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a forgery, it was a masterpiece of deception, designed to fool even an expert eye. The specific Aegean culture it mimicked was obscure enough to avoid widespread scrutiny, yet significant enough to pique the interest of a dedicated historian like Finch. My understanding of Finch's work, and indeed, his death, shifted dramatically. He wasn't just researching forgotten cultures, he was likely investigating a sophisticated forgery ring. A ring capable of producing fakes so convincing they could pass for genuine relics, probably infiltrating academic circles and private collections. Finch, with his meticulous eye for detail, must have uncovered something devastating. The fall from the balustrade wasn't an accident. It was an execution, designed to look like one. I needed more. I packed the fragment carefully back into its box, my hands trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and grim determination. My next step was clear: back to the estate. I needed to find whatever Finch had found. I called the estate's caretaker, an older man with a perpetually worried expression, to arrange access to Finch's study. He sounded hesitant, but I reminded him of the ongoing investigation, however officially closed it was. He relented, agreeing to meet me within the hour. The drive back to the estate felt different now. The picturesque landscape, once merely a backdrop, now seemed to hold a sinister edge. The caretaker let me in, his eyes darting nervously. "Just don't touch anything, Professor," he mumbled, before retreating to the kitchen, leaving me alone in the silent, dust-moted study. I moved with purpose, scanning the room not for signs of struggle, but for anything out of place, anything Finch might have overlooked or deliberately hidden. The stacks of books, the scattered notes, the half-finished cup of tea, all were part of the facade of a scholar at work. But I knew better. I ran my hand along the spines of the bookshelves, feeling for loose panels or unusual textures. Nothing. I checked under the desk, behind the curtains, even inside the antique globe. Empty. The frustration was a hot coal in my chest. Finch was too careful, too smart, to leave his findings exposed. Then I remembered his habit. Finch always had a specific weight or prop he used to hold down his research papers, a small, polished stone or an antique paperweight. I looked at the desk, cluttered with papers, and saw a heavy bronze bust of a Roman emperor. It seemed innocuous, but my gut told me to check it. I picked it up. It felt solid, perhaps a little heavier than it looked. Beneath where it had sat, a faint, circular indentation marked the polished wood. But it wasn't just an indentation. A sliver of the desktop, about an inch wide, was slightly depressed, almost imperceptibly so, along the curve of the indentation. It was a hair's breadth from being invisible. My fingers traced the faint outline. A hidden compartment. Of course. Finch, the man who meticulously documented every anachronism, every deviation, would have a secret place for his most dangerous discoveries. I pressed down gently along the seam. I tried a different spot, then another, applying slight pressure, searching for a release. Finally, with a soft click, a narrow panel along the desk's edge sprang inward, revealing a shallow recess. My heart hammered against my ribs. Inside, nestled amongst velvet lining, were two items, a small, encrypted solid-state drive and a folded piece of aged parchment. I carefully extracted the parchment. It was heavy, brittle, and covered in what appeared to be a complex array of symbols, lines, and annotations. It looked like a map, but the markings were utterly alien, a cryptic language of angles and unfamiliar glyphs, overlaid on what might have been an ancient coastline or a topographical survey. This wasn't just about a forgery ring anymore. Finch had stumbled onto something far grander, far more dangerous, than I could have imagined. The tension in the room coiled around me, a silent warning. I had found his secrets. Fluorescent lights, unforgiving in their brightness, reflected off the polished stainless steel surfaces, illuminating every speck of dust that dared to settle. Here, precision was paramount, and I needed every ounce of it. The detective's deadline loomed, a pressure I could almost physically feel pressing down on my shoulders, sharpening my focus to a razor's edge. I sat hunched over the workstation, a specialized forensic computer displaying an array of hexadecimal code and spectral analyses. Before me lay the fragments of the coded map, meticulously reassembled under a magnifying lens. It wasn't just a simple treasure map. The paper's antique fibers hinted at its age, but the encoding itself was a blend of archaic ciphers and surprisingly modern obfuscation techniques. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate work of bone reconstruction, moved with a different kind of precision across the keyboard, inputting sequences, running algorithms. The first few hours were a grueling exercise in pattern recognition. I started with the obvious, cross-referencing known historical ciphers. Nothing. Then I shifted to less common methods, the kind favored by secret societies or intelligence agencies from a bygone era. A faint tremor of excitement ran through me when a peculiar symbol, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, repeated itself within the map's border designs. It wasn't part of the cipher itself, but a key, a subtle marker. I fed this symbol into a frequency analysis program, hoping it would unlock a hidden layer. The screen flickered, displaying a new string of characters. It wasn't a direct translation, but a directional prompt, pointing to a specific sequence within the encrypted digital files I'd recovered from the historian's study. The files, locked behind layers of a sophisticated encryption protocol, had been a tougher nut to crack. I'd spent days on them, bouncing between brute force attacks and more nuanced attempts to exploit potential backdoors. Now, the map offered a potential Rosetta Stone. I switched screens, bringing up the encrypted files. Following the map's cryptic lead, I isolated a particular data block and applied the sequence I'd just derived. The progress bar crawled, then suddenly surged. A cascade of alphanumeric characters scrolled down the screen, then resolved into coherent text. The first document that opened was a ledger of sorts, though not of financial transactions. It listed names, not of individuals, but of entities: the Obsidian Circle, the Chronos Collective, the Septimius Society. Beside each, dates and references to acquisition and preservation were noted. My breath hitched. These weren't just wealthy collectors, these were organizations, shadowy historical societies operating under elaborate pseudonyms. The dates stretched back centuries, weaving a tapestry of influence and control that was far more extensive than I had initially imagined. Deeper within the files, I found encrypted communications, their language archaic but chillingly clear. They spoke of the legacy, not as an inheritance, but as a living entity, a historical narrative they were sworn to protect and perpetuate. And then there were the keepers. These were the inner sanctum, the architects of this grand deception. They weren't merely collecting artifacts, they were actively manipulating the historical record, ensuring only their version of events survived. One particular file, labeled Protocol Sigma, detailed the methodology. It wasn't about forging artifacts to sell, it was about replacing genuine artifacts that contradicted their narrative with carefully crafted anachronistic fakes, or burying the genuine articles where they would never see the light of day. The historian, I realized with a jolt, hadn't just stumbled upon a forgery ring. He'd threatened to expose a carefully constructed alternate reality, a historical narrative built on lies and enforced by powerful, unseen hands. The anachronistic details I'd found on his remains, the strange mixture of ancient and modern, were not accidental. They were deliberate, a calling card, or perhaps a warning. My fingers paused over the keyboard, the hum of the clean room suddenly deafening. The sheer audacity of it, the scale of the operation, was staggering. This wasn't about profit alone, it was about power, about controlling the very fabric of understanding. The historian's death, initially dismissed as a tragic fall, now screamed murder. He must have been close, too close, to unveiling their grand scheme. I was no longer merely a forensic anthropologist examining ancient bones. And I had just peeled back the first layer. The detective's threat to close the case felt distant, almost irrelevant now. I wasn't just proving a hunch, I was fighting for the truth. My deadline was still ticking, but the stakes had just escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. I pressed save, securing the evidence, knowing this was just the beginning. The air, recycled and filtered to an extreme degree, felt thin, almost brittle against my skin. Hours bled into one another, my focus narrowed to the microscopic world projected onto the large digital display before me. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the pristine glass of the monitor for a fleeting second before dissipating. The electron microscope's output displayed the mineral dust, magnified countless times, revealing its intricate, almost alien topography. I'd run every test available: X-ray diffraction, scanning electron microscopy, energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. What I saw wasn't just dust, it was a geological anomaly. The specific combination of trace elements, a high concentration of cerium, neodymium, and dysprosium, alongside a unique crystalline structure not commonly found in surface soils, was a fingerprint. It wasn't merely rare, it was specific. My fingers danced across the keyboard, cross-referencing geological databases, topographical maps, and even historical mining records. The initial search yielded nothing definitive, but I refined the parameters, focusing on regions known for ancient, undisturbed strata, areas with unique magmatic intrusions or hydrothermal vents that could produce such a signature. Hours later, a single, flickering match appeared on the screen, an obscure reference in an old geological survey from the late 19th century. It pointed to a remote, privately owned estate, nestled deep within a forgotten valley, known for its untouched wilderness and rumored ancient historical significance. The estate wasn't just old, it was geologically unique, a specific mineralogical island in a sea of common rock. A cold certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't just a tragic fall. This dust, this unique signature, placed Dr. Finch not just at the estate, but likely inside a very specific, geologically distinct part of it. The implications were chilling. Dr. Finch had been researching something dangerous, something tied directly to this rare mineral, to this specific location. I pulled back from the microscope, rubbing the ache from my temples. The physical evidence was screaming, but it lacked a voice, a narrative. My mind drifted back to Dr. Finch's academic history, to the names he occasionally mentioned with a mix of reverence and frustration. One name, in particular, resurfaced: an emeritus professor, a retired curator from a prestigious university archive, who had been Dr. Finch's mentor decades ago. Finch navigated, it would be him. Tracking down the retired curator wasn't difficult, just time-consuming. A few calls to the university's alumni office and a search through public records led me to a quiet, tree-lined street on the outskirts of the city. The house was a modest bungalow, its garden meticulously kept, a testament to years of careful attention. After a hesitant knock, the door creaked open, revealing an older man. With sharp, intelligent eyes that peered at me over the rim of half-moon spectacles. His face was a roadmap of fine wrinkles, his posture slightly stooped, but there was an unmistakable spark of intellect in his gaze. "Seth. I remember you," the retired curator said, his voice a dry rustle, surprisingly strong. "Finch spoke highly of your work. Said you had a knack for seeing what others missed." He invited me into a living room overflowing with books, the air thick with the smell of aged paper and leather. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the drawn curtains. I got straight to the point, avoiding platitudes. "Professor, I'm investigating Dr. Finch's death. It wasn't an accident. I believe he was looking into something that got him killed. Something connected to ancient artifacts and a very specific mineral." The curator's expression tightened, the warmth in his eyes dimming. He moved to a worn armchair, settling into it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Finch. He always chased ghosts. Brilliant man, but reckless. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, connections where others saw coincidence. He was onto something big, Professor," I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "I've found a unique mineral dust on his remains and at the scene. It points to a very specific, remote location. And I'm starting to believe this goes beyond a simple trade of artifacts." I watched his face carefully, searching for a flicker of recognition, a tell. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a distant point, as if sifting through decades of memories. He called them the Keepers. He paused, taking a slow, deliberate breath. "A secret society. Ancient. Powerful. They don't just trade artifacts, Seth. They control them. They curate history itself, deciding what is seen, what is hidden, what is forgotten, for political leverage, for financial gain. Where would they typically focus their efforts?" He looked at me, a warning in his eyes. "Anywhere a significant archaeological find could challenge established history. Anywhere a discovery could shift power. They have deep roots, private estates, hidden caches. Places where certain rare geological formations might also exist." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The unique mineral dust, the remote private estate with its historically significant and geologically distinct nature, and now the Keepers, a society dedicated to controlling archaeological finds for political and financial gain, with a penchant for operating from hidden, geographically unique locations. The specific estate, the one the geological survey had flagged, was not just a potential crime scene, it was a stronghold. "Professor, the dust I found. It has a signature. A signature that matches an incredibly rare geological formation found only at one place. A remote, private estate. And in more danger than you can imagine." His voice was grave, the intellectual spark replaced by a profound weariness. "Finch tried to expose them. They don't tolerate loose ends." I left the curator's house, the scent of old paper and the weight of his warning clinging to me. The world outside, once mundane, now felt charged with a new, terrifying clarity. I had a name, the Keepers, and a target, a specific, remote private estate. But I also knew I was stepping onto a battlefield where history itself was a weapon, and the truth, a deadly liability. And now, I was following his footsteps directly into the lion's den. Under the harsh, focused beam of the stereo microscope, I meticulously adjusted the stage, bringing the minuscule fibers into sharp relief. They were fragments, almost invisible to the naked eye, scraped from the sole of my boot after my visit to the curator's house. He had warned me, and I had left with more than just a name. I'd carried away microscopic evidence. My breath misted the eyepiece for a moment, and I paused, steadying myself. The fibers were unusual, a blend of modern synthetic material, likely from a high-tech security uniform, interwoven with ancient flax. Not just any flax, but flax bearing the distinct dye signature I'd once cataloged from a collection of unearthed Egyptian textiles, a collection last seen decades ago before it vanished from the legitimate academic record. This wasn't incidental contamination. This was a signature, a trace, pointing a direct line from the curator, to the keepers, and now, to Elias Thorne. I logged the findings, sealed the slides, and methodically disinfected my workstation. Every movement was precise, practiced. The clean room demanded exactitude, just as the coming task would. I packed a small kit, specialized lock-picking tools, a miniature thermal imager, a directional audio amplifier, and a low-light monocular. No firearms, no blunt instruments. My weapons were my mind, my training, and the element of surprise. The drive to Thorne's estate was a descent into an increasingly isolated landscape. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a narrow, unmaintained track that snaked through dense, ancient woodland. The GPS signal wavered, then died, leaving me reliant on a topographical map I'd studied until its contours were etched into my memory. Moonlight, thin and diffused by a persistent haze, cast long, distorted shadows, making the trees seem to writhe. This place was designed for concealment, a fortress cloaked in nature. I parked my vehicle several miles from the estate gates, burying it under a camouflage tarp I'd brought. My heart hammered a steady rhythm against my ribs, not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of the hunt. The estate itself was a sprawling, anachronistic monstrosity. A Gothic Revival mansion, incongruously fitted with modern security infrastructure, rose from the crest of a low hill. Infrared cameras peered from under ornate eaves, motion sensors dotted the perimeter, and a formidable electric fence hummed with latent power. I spent hours observing, mapping patrol routes, identifying blind spots in the surveillance grid. My entry point was a service tunnel, identified from old architectural blueprints I'd acquired through a less-than-legal channel. It led from a disused pump house several hundred yards from the main building. A soft thunk signaled success. The tunnel was a claustrophobic crawl through damp earth and crumbling concrete, smelling of mildew and stagnant water. It was a relic, likely overlooked in Thorne's modern security upgrades. Following the faint hum of machinery I detected earlier, I navigated a labyrinth of utility corridors. The air grew warmer, carrying the faint, acrid scent of solvents and fine dust. I paused at a reinforced steel door, the hum now a low thrum against my ear. Using my thermal imager, I saw heat signatures inside, but no active movement. A quick scan with the audio amplifier confirmed no voices, only the mechanical sounds. I picked the lock, a far more sophisticated mechanism than the pump house, and slipped inside. The sight that greeted me was sickeningly familiar, yet on a scale I hadn't imagined. This was no amateur's operation. This was a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. Banks of specialized equipment lined the walls, laser engravers, high-resolution 3D printers, chemical baths for accelerated aging, and sophisticated pigment analysis machines. Workbenches were strewn with meticulously crafted replicas of ancient pottery shards, miniature cuneiform tablets, and bronze figurines, all in various stages of completion. One table held an almost perfect forgery of a Roman coin, its patina artificially weathered, its mint marks subtly altered. This wasn't just about selling fakes, it was about corrupting the historical record, about rewriting the past. My stomach churned. A discreet panel, disguised as part of a shelving unit holding chemical reagents, caught my eye. It was too pristine, too flush with the wall. Running my hand over the surface, I felt the faint seam. This was no ordinary storage. It took another tense 10 minutes to bypass the panel's internal locking mechanism, a silent, intricate dance of probes and micropicks. The air within was cool, dry, and carried the faint, unmistakable scent of antiquity, of dust undisturbed for centuries. I stepped into a hidden vault. It was a climate-controlled chamber, far larger than the passage suggested, its walls lined with custom-built display cases. Inside, bathed in soft, archival lighting, was a breathtaking and horrifying collection. Not forgeries, but genuine, priceless artifacts. A golden funerary mask, not unlike the one famously stolen from a Cairo museum years ago, gleamed from behind reinforced glass. Scrolls of papyrus, perfectly preserved, sat in oxygen-free environments. Intricately carved jade figures, unmistakably Mesoamerican, stood alongside Byzantine mosaics and Sumerian tablets. These weren't just collector's items, they were the missing pieces of history, clearly stolen from legitimate archaeological sites, their provenance erased, their true origins obscured. Thorne wasn't just facilitating the trade of fakes, he was hoarding the real thing, perhaps to manipulate market value, or worse, to control the narrative of the past itself. As I moved deeper into the vault, a subtle shift in the air pressure registered. A faint, high-pitched whine began, almost imperceptible. My thermal imager flickered, then displayed an overlay of laser grids materializing across the room. I had tripped a silent alarm, a layered security system far more advanced than anything I'd anticipated. Red lights began to pulse from the corners of the vault, illuminating my position. A deep, resonant voice, synthesized and devoid of emotion, echoed from hidden speakers. Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols initiated. Intruders will be neutralized. I didn't hesitate. I spun, darting back through the now illuminated laser grid, contorting my body to avoid the crimson beams. The vault door, which had silently closed behind me, began to grind shut, a thick slab of steel moving with terrifying speed. I threw myself forward, a desperate lunge, sliding under the descending door just as it slammed home with a deafening clang that reverberated through the entire sub-basement. Alarms blared now, a cacophony of sirens echoing through the corridors. Footsteps, heavy and numerous, pounded above me. I was exposed, my infiltration compromised. Thorne's advanced security systems had detected my presence, and now the hunters were coming. My narrow escape from the vault was just the beginning. I was a target. I slid, not gracefully, but effectively, under the closing maw of the vault door. The grinding noise of steel on steel reverberated through my bones, a physical echo of the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The air in the corridor was thick with the scent of ozone and the metallic tang of fear. I didn't spare a glance back, clutching the encrypted drive and the handful of trace samples I'd snatched from the inner chamber. My escape from Thorne's estate had been a blur of shadows and hushed movements, my instincts honed to a razor's edge. It was late, the building mostly empty, the silence broken only by the low thrum of the HEPA filters and the rhythmic click of the airlock cycling as I entered. I stripped off my outer layers, bagging them for later examination, and donned the sterile gown, mask, and gloves. Here, every speck, every fiber, told a story. And I intended to make them sing. The holographic display above my workstation flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional map of Thorne's estate. I uploaded the photographic evidence from the drive, the images blooming across the sterile surfaces of the room. The vault's interior, the stacked crates, the ancient texts, the peculiar, almost obsidian-like artifacts, rotated slowly, allowing me to zoom in, to scrutinize every surface. My fingers flew across the interface, cross-referencing, annotating. I felt no fatigue, only a burning focus, a desperate race against time. The first layer of evidence was Finch. I pulled up the high-resolution scans of his clothing, the subtle tears, the minute soil transfer, the almost imperceptible bruising. My initial assessment of a fall, tragic but accidental, had been systematically dismantled by the anachronistic fibers and the unique mineral residue I'd found on his person. I zoomed in further, pushing the digital magnification to its limit. The intricate weave of the fabric was unlike anything I had ever encountered in modern textiles. It was a complex blend of plant fibers, dyed with a pigment that appeared almost black, yet shimmered with subtle violet undertones under specific lighting. I pulled up the micro-photographs of the fibers I'd collected from Finch's torn jacket, a match. The ceremonial dagger, stored deep within Thorne's illicit vault, had been the source. Finch hadn't just stumbled, he had been attacked, likely in a struggle involving that very artifact. The tears on his jacket were consistent with a sharp, bladed instrument, not a jagged rock from a fall. But the dagger wasn't the only anomaly. I brought up the trace evidence I'd collected from the landing site below Finch's study window and from the disturbed soil around the estate's perimeter. There, embedded in a minute clump of soil from Finch's shoe, was a minuscule fragment of a unique mineral. It was a silicate, yes, but with an unusual crystalline structure and a faint, almost metallic sheen. It had perplexed me at the initial examination. Now, I cross-referenced it with the geological data from the vault images. I isolated a high-resolution scan of the floor of the vault itself, noting the faint dust and debris. A perfect match. The unique mineral residue found on Finch had come directly from Thorne's secret vault, carried out on Finch's person, or perhaps on his assailant. Thorne. His meticulous facade of the grieving colleague had shattered completely. Finch's death was no accident. It was a deliberate act, orchestrated by Thorne to protect whatever ancient secrets were hidden within that vault. The motive solidified, the illicit trade of artifacts, yes, but something deeper. The symbols I'd glimpsed on the texts, on the artifacts themselves, they were all part of a cohesive, terrifying narrative. My fingers flew across the keyboard, compiling the digital presentation. Each slide was a hammer blow, each piece of evidence an unassailable fact. The anachronistic fibers from Finch's clothing matching the dagger's hilt. The unique mineral fragments linking him to the vault floor. The specific microabrasions on Finch's hands consistent with a struggle, not a simple fall. The patterns of blood spatter, minute but telling, indicating a struggle before the fall, not after. Event, the final slide clicked into place, a timeline, stark and irrefutable, detailing the sequence of events that led to Finch's murder, culminating in Thorne's culpability. The case was built. It was airtight. I knew the chief investigator had close ties to Thorne, a respected figure in the community. My life was now explicitly in danger. My phone, secured in a Faraday bag on the clean room's outer bench, vibrated once, then twice. No caller ID. A warning? Or perhaps they already knew I had the pieces. My breath plumed faintly in the cool, sterile air. I had done my part. The evidence was undeniable. Now, I had to ensure it saw the light of day, even if it meant stepping into the heart of the fire. I didn't waste a second marveling at my narrow escape. The grinding had stopped, the vault door sealed behind me, a tomb for the secrets I'd just unearthed. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the sudden silence. My hands, scraped raw from the slide, trembled as I pushed myself up. I was in a service tunnel, narrow and dark, smelling faintly of damp earth and disused machinery. The cold stone pressed against my back as I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. No signal. Of course. I moved, guided by a faint draft, my mind racing. The hidden chamber, the perfectly preserved forgeries, the disturbing ritualistic elements, it all clicked into place. Dr. Finch hadn't just discovered a trade, he'd stumbled into something far older, far more entrenched than simple artifact smuggling. This was about belief, about a legacy Thorne was desperate to protect. My discovery wasn't just evidence of a crime, it was an indictment of an entire secret society. I emerged, gasping, into the cool night air, far from the main manor, near a disused stable block. My clothes were torn, my face streaked with grime, but I clutched the small, vital samples I'd managed to grab, a sliver of unique clay, a fragment of charred organic matter, a single, minuscule fiber from the fabric covering the illicit hoard. These were my weapons. The air, filtered and recycled, felt thin, clinical. I moved with a focused intensity, my exhaustion pushed aside by the sheer weight of what I knew. Under the harsh glare of the examination lights, the world narrowed to microns and molecular structures. I laid out my finds, the clay fragment, a distinctive geological signature I'd recognized from Dr. Finch's research notes, pointing to a specific, uncatalogued archaeological site. Revealed a weave and dye composition that screamed modern forgery, expertly aged to deceive. Seth, are you sure about this? The detective's voice, quiet and laced with concern, broke my concentration. He stood by the sealed door, a silent sentinel, watching me work. Going after Thorne directly. It's like kicking a hornet's nest with a spoon. I didn't look up. My fingers, steady now, adjusted the focus on a tiny fleck of ancient pigment. A hornet's nest, perhaps, but I've got the insecticide. I finally met his gaze, my conviction unwavering. He orchestrated Dr. Finch's death. He's running an operation that's not just about money, but about rewriting history, about a twisted reverence for a past that should stay buried. He won't admit it in a private interview. He needs to be exposed, publicly, undeniably. My plan was forming, sharp and precise. Thorne prided himself on his intellectual superiority, his untouchable reputation. That was his weakness. I would use his own venue, his own curated world, against him. I need to call a press conference, I stated, the words feeling heavy and deliberate. Not just any conference. A lecture. At the estate. Ostensibly, to present my final findings on Dr. Finch's tragic accident. I'll make sure Thorne is present. The curator, too. Everyone who has a stake in his carefully constructed lie. The detective frowned. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. "You want to bait him." "I want to corner him," I corrected, returning to the microscope. "I want to present the evidence so clearly, irrefutably, that he has no choice but to react. And when he reacts, the truth will come out." The next evening, the grand lecture hall of Thorne's estate buzzed with an uncomfortable tension. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and hushed expectations. Thorne sat in the front row, a picture of aristocratic calm, though I caught the subtle clench of his jaw. The curator, rigid beside him, watched me like a hawk. Every local dignitary, every prominent historian, every reporter I could muster, filled the plush seats. I stood at the podium, the projector casting my slides onto the screen behind me. My voice, calm and measured, began with the innocuous details of a forensic investigation, the trajectory of the fall, the nature of the injuries. I spoke of Dr. Finch's brilliance, his dedication to historical truth. Then, I shifted. However, I announced, my gaze sweeping across the room, lingering on Thorne, my investigation revealed anomalies. Minute details that defied the simple narrative of a tragic accident. I projected images of the unique soil sample, highlighting its precise geological origin, far from the estate grounds. This soil, I explained, was found embedded in Dr. Finch's shoes. Thorne's expression tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. And then, I continued, my voice gaining momentum, there were the artifacts themselves. Purported treasures from the estate's collection, revered for their antiquity. I displayed magnified images of the ancient clay fragment, then juxtaposed it with a slide detailing the modern dyes and weaving patterns of the fabric fiber. These artifacts, ladies and gentlemen, are not what they seem. The clay, the pigments, the very material composition, betray a meticulous, sophisticated forgery. A forgery designed to replicate items from that very unexcavated site. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Dr. Finch was not just a historian, he was a threat. Thorne surged to his feet, his face a mask of furious indignation. "This is outrageous. Slander. My collection is beyond reproach. You accuse me, without proof, of murder." "The proof, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice cutting through his outburst, "is in the details." Finch knew. He was close to exposing you. Not a fall, but a calculated push, made to look like an accident, to protect your legacy and your lucrative, deceitful trade. Thorne's composure shattered. Two burly figures, not security guards, moved swiftly, cutting off the exits. The game, I realized, had just turned deadly. The confrontation I'd orchestrated was now a fight for my life. The game, I realized, was far from over. Thorne's eyes, cold and calculating, promised a reckoning, but fate, or perhaps the meticulous planning of a diligent colleague, had other ideas. Just as the two burly figures began their deliberate advance, the hall doors burst open again, this time admitting a phalanx of uniformed officers and plainclothes investigators, led by the lead detective. The sudden, overwhelming presence of legitimate authority shattered the carefully cultivated tension Thorne had orchestrated. The burly figures, caught off guard, hesitated, then moved to block the new arrivals, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The room erupted into a cacophony of shouts, commands, and the scuffle of struggling bodies. Thorne, surprisingly, offered no resistance, a strange, almost serene smile playing on their lips as the lead detective placed them under arrest. Their gaze lingered on me for a final, unnerving moment, a silent message that even behind bars, some legacies persist. The ensuing days were a blur of debriefings, official statements, and the systematic dismantling of Thorne's illicit empire. The lead detective informed me that the tip-off about Thorne's desperate last stand had come from an anonymous source, likely one of Thorne's disaffected inner circle, or perhaps someone I had inadvertently swayed during my investigations. Regardless, the timely intervention prevented a far more violent outcome. The artifacts, the ancient relics that had fueled this dark enterprise, were recovered from a series of cleverly disguised underground bunkers beneath the estate and a hidden compartment within a remote warehouse. Each piece, from the smallest carved amulet to the larger, intricately decorated sarcophagus fragments, was catalogued and meticulously handled. The public exposure of the keepers followed swiftly. The historical community reeled, grappling with the betrayal and the desecration of their field. For me, it was a quiet vindication, a testament to the power of overlooked details and the relentless pursuit of truth. Weeks later, the dust settled into a fine, almost invisible layer, much like the ancient grime I had meticulously scraped from skeletal remains. I was alone, surrounded by the remnants of the case, photographs, digital scans, and the few non-artifactual pieces of evidence that had been deemed crucial. On the steel workbench before me lay the small, anachronistic bronze buckle, its faint floral pattern now familiar, and the magnified image of the minuscule, almost imperceptible scratch on the victim's femur, the initial, nagging anomaly that had unraveled everything. I picked up the buckle, turning it over in my gloved hand. It was a simple object, yet it had been the key. The subtle discrepancy in its metallurgy, the minute stylistic deviation from the period it purported to represent, had screamed fraud to my trained eye. That, combined with the impossible angle of the fall suggested by the bone trauma, had set me on a path few would have dared to tread. The weight of it, insignificant in my palm, felt immense, burdened with the lives it had touched and the history it had rewritten. I traced the floral pattern with a fingertip, a ghost of a touch through the nitrile. The historian, a man whose life had been dedicated to preserving the past, had been murdered for threatening to expose a false one. The irony was a bitter taste. I thought of the countless hours spent hunched over microscopes, meticulously documenting every fracture, every trace element, every scrape and indentation. The isolation, the frustration, the moments of profound doubt, they had all culminated in this quiet aftermath. The emotional and psychological toll was undeniable. I felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to alleviate. The world, once a place of predictable scientific principles, now seemed to hide malevolent undercurrents I had only just begun to perceive. Yet, amidst the weariness, there was a fierce sense of purpose. Justice had been served, not through brute force or political machinations, but through the patient, unwavering pursuit of scientific truth. My work, often dismissed as morbid curiosity or academic esotericism, had exposed a network of criminals and brought a measure of closure to a heinous crime. It reinforced my belief that even the smallest, most insignificant detail could hold the key to the greatest mysteries, if one only had the patience and the will to look. The forensic anthropologist I had been before this case felt like a distant memory, a more naive version of myself. This journey had changed me, sharpened my resolve, and perhaps, irrevocably altered my perspective. The world was full of forgotten legacies, not all of them benign, and I had a unique skill set to bring them to light. The hum of the filtration system was a reminder of the clean room's purpose: to prevent contamination, to preserve the integrity of evidence. But outside these walls, the world was messy, contaminated with deceit and hidden agendas. I felt a pull, a growing conviction that my role couldn't end here, in the quiet analysis of bones and buckles. There were other secrets buried, other truths waiting to be unearthed. The comfortable academic life, the meticulous, controlled environment, suddenly felt too small, too safe. The pursuit of justice through science, I realized, might demand a more dangerous, more active engagement. The game, it seemed, was truly just beginning.